Today I'm joined by Camilla Sutton, Chief Currency Strategist at Scotia Capital. Thank you for joining me, Camilla. Firstly, let's discuss the big US news release, the non-farm payroll figures. What exactly are you expecting?
Well, leading into the ADP release, which came in well above expectation, the now whisper number for non-farm is a little bit higher than it was. So leading into that release, it was about 100,000, and now that's been pushed a bit higher because we did have such a strong ADP release. You know, I think all in all, the truth of the matter is that employment gains to date have been disappointing for the Fed and for markets, and that in turn is likely to leave the Fed fairly dovish. But you know, we should see a slightly stronger employment release this month than certainly we saw last month, and that will be somewhat encouraging for markets.
Canada are also awaiting unemployment figures today. What are you anticipating there?
Well, the expectation is that we still see job gains in Canada that are slightly more subdued than last month. All in all, our unemployment rate has fallen, and that's been a good thing. So it's down at 7.4% and expected to remain there after tomorrow's release. And all in all, the employment front in Canada has actually held up very well and have been a very strong note for the fundamental economy. So that in turn has worked favorably in the Canadian dollar's favor.
So at the moment, we've got monetary tightening in the States, China's inflation issues, problems in the Eurozone. All of this seems to be spoiling investors' appetite for riskier assets. Is this the case, and how do you see the situation changing?
Well, it's interesting. What we're seeing with CAD is that it's really hugging the U.S. dollar fairly closely. So on days when the U.S. dollar is weak, Canada tends to strengthen against the U.S., but we tend to weaken against almost everybody else, and vice versa. So on days when the U.S. dollar is strong, Canada actually weakens against the U.S., but strengthens against everyone else on the crosses. And so I think that just implies how close our ties are into the U.S. and how the market is really treating us as part of that NAFTA bloc.
Okay, let's turn our attentions to the euro dollar now. Where do you see that going in the short, mid and long term?
Sure. So for the euro, you know, our expectation is really that we continue to see support from authorities in Europe, and that in turn supports euro into year-end. So we have a 150 year-end call for euro. I think that in the very short term, you know, we expect a lot of ongoing volatility and a lot of intraday activity. But when we look at euro over the last couple months, it has been in a fairly tight range, and it's had difficulty really breaking outside of that. And I think that's just reflective of all the pushes and pulls. There's a very weak U.S. dollar side of the story and a weak euro side of the story, and together market participants are struggling with where to push it. So in the near term, I think we continue to see some volatility, but moving into year end, I think we see euro start to strengthen up again, and closes the year at a stronger level than it's at today with a 150 handle.
And going back to the loonie then, what are your expectations there?
In terms of the Canadian dollar, you know, the view is that overall we see global growth still strong. So growth in China well above 9% this year and next, and that's supportive of commodities, as well as very loose monetary policy in the U.S. and a weak U.S. dollar side of the story, all fairly supportive of the Canadian dollar. So in the very near term, I think it's unlikely that we really break out of this current range. So we have a Q3 forecast of 96 cents in dollar Canada, and then a year end of exactly the same 96, so somewhat of a range-bound story for Canada, and then strengthening as we get into 2012. You know, really for Canada, we're really tied into this U.S. story, but also tied into the commodity story, and it's forcing us into a fairly tight range here.
Thank you for joining me, Camilla. Stay tuned to Dukascopy TV for more exclusive interviews.